Programmes, Industry Impacts and Internship Committee, and is also the co-founder of DomainX. Next, we've got Thane Campbell of Deep Science Ventures. So Deep Science Ventures launched in a new PhD programme, the Venture Science Doctorate, VSD, and that's set up to tackle the critical bottleneck in the science commercialisation, and that bottleneck is talent. So Thane works alongside government agencies, leading universities and venture builders on the VSD. Then we've got Nick Johnson, who is the Chief Strategy and Impact Officer at the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, with a remit to ensure that the Catapult remains at the forefront of driving innovation in the field of advanced therapy medicinal products. And last but not at all least, we're joined by Joe Pisani. Joe's got over 30 years industry and consulting experience. She formerly led PwC's UK pharmaceutical and life sciences practice, and she now chairs London's MedCity and Birmingham's PHTA organisation, as well as sitting on the board of a number of companies. Joe's a passionate supporter of critical public health issues, such as tackling dementia and addressing antimicrobial resistance. So welcome to everyone. Looking forward to what you have to say as we go forward. So let's kick off. What I'm going to do, I'll ask each of the panelists to give their perspective on the current UK infrastructure before opening the session up for people to ask questions or indeed give their perspectives on the challenges for innovation in UK life sciences. So let's kick off with Renos. So Renos, the stated aim of the Doctoral Training Partnerships is to create the next generation of researchers to transform global health. And I think we've talked about that and kind of brought it down to it's to get industry-ready doctoral graduates into our sector. So do we believe that the DTPs are working successfully, and how should they evolve?
Thank you, Paul. So are the DTPs working successfully? I'll come out with a straight yes. But I suppose the question is more relevant to what else can we do that the DTPs aren't doing. So what are the DTPs doing that makes me say a resounding yes? Well, they are getting graduates out on time, highly skilled, aware of industry and its different objectives as compared to academia. We want to emphasize the on-time aspect, because when you sign up for a PhD, you're signing away a few years of your life to, in life sciences, quite often a practice that builds resilience, because you're really doing state-of-the-art experimentation. You can't guarantee that's going to work. And it's variously spoken about, you know, us on the academic side of the fence say it's 4 years long. Those on the industry side say it's more like 7 years long if you really think about all of the comings and goings between getting onto the program and then getting into a job and realizing your value. So the on-time aspect we're quite proud of. Very much the structured approach of DTPs and getting that supervisory part right. It's not perfect on a very, very fine grain level, but it's certainly better than, let's say, my generation's experience of a PhD. So DTPs do that very well. I happen to be involved, as you've said, with industry awareness training and bringing industry voices to the table on the internships impact and industry committee. So we have a real industry say in what our students should be doing. Which meetings should they go to? What kind of trainings should they be thinking about? How should they be meeting potential employers before they get in a position where they're thinking, I need a job? So again, the DTPs, certainly I speak for the Lido program where I'm active, but I think the DTPs in general are doing that well. So where could they be doing better? Well, one of the things they made a foray into is some follow-on money so that PhDs can competitively, in the graduation year, apply for extra money so that they can specifically address focus of more business-like behavior. Now, only a small percentage of students would want to do that. And secondly, there's only so much money. So if the DTPs could do something better, they'd make it possible for more of the cohort to experience that and be in a better place. Of course, the success stories are great. We've had a spin out from Lido Booby Biome. They're doing very well. We've got you know, a number of alumni stories on the Lido website people can look at. But I would say what we need to do is to say we need to ready more of a percentage of our PhD students. And, you know, if I get time later, perhaps we can talk about the postdocs as well. But yes, the DTPs do as well as far as it goes, but we could do more.
And how do you ensure that you're engaging with industry and that when the call goes out for papers, for instance, that what we're actually getting, because that's going to be what, 7 years hence before the PhD, the doctoral graduates are coming out. How do we make sure that they are relevant in 7 years' time, that they're not just relevant for what's here today and might not be relevant then?
Again, I would say the DTPs are getting this right. It's a call to tender. So in order to run a DTP program, you have to demonstrate that your incoming cohorts are going to get trained in the state of the art. We happen to be in yet another one of those periods where the state of the art is accelerating faster than we can keep up with it. But I'd like to say I happen to be supervising a Lido student at the moment who's working at the forefront of AI and protein design. So these kind of things, they keep up with themselves as long as the DTP is built up around the right higher education infrastructure.
That's fantastic. So let me move on to Thane. Thane, you've set up a new PhD program, the Venture Science Doctorate. Can you tell us a bit more about it? And was it set up because the current infrastructure is failing to produce what you believe the quality and quantity of talent that's required in our sector?
By combining available scientific knowledge and founder type and refining the system that we use to create science companies by redesigning complex sectors like the life sciences with a top-down vision and really developing a system and a scientific practice around that. And so that's our model, and the Venture Science Doctorate really extends that. We extend by being venture focused in the curriculum. So from recruitment through to training, including mentorship, we are outcome centric. And so there's bottleneck analysis run in year 1 of the program so that, to your point about how we can keep facing the future with new initiatives, I think that scales right down to the individuals coming into our workforce, sharing that passion and enthusiasm and having that skill set. And so training people to be outcome-centric is something we're very passionate about. We've developed a whole ontology that we use called scoping, which you can read more about on our website. We're also a distributed institution, so we're working with over a dozen universities at the moment, including Imperial College London, including the University of Edinburgh, the Mayo Clinic in the States, and Cornell as well. And so the advantage here is to be portable, and so that we can actually have a truly interdisciplinary project, because when you need expertise, you can move to collaborators' labs, even if it's in a different university, and we want to facilitate that. And then finally, we're diversity first, and we think that that's really important in the life sciences, and I guess across PhD STEM training, where we do see ethnic minorities, certainly the Black category, having a sort of 54% fall off rate from undergraduate forms of STEM training to PhD, and that for white students, for example, that's 1%. So those are some of the pillars. And I guess just to give you a flavor of what the actual experience through the PhD feels like, if you were recruited, you could start with that bottleneck analysis. And so let's say you came into our climate sector. We have 4 sectors at DSV. If you came into the climate sector, you would be running your bottleneck analysis. You might identify that fertilizer use is going up and up and up. And that's a stable kind of trend. You might also intimate that fertilizer spill-offs go into rivers, nitrify them, and kill fish. And so what you would then do, you would have a kind of North Star desired societal outcome, which in the climate sector might be generating renewable fuels. That problem that you have identified might be the space that you do it in. And so with fertilizer waste, you might say, I could use synthetic biology. I could engineer bacterium to go into the river, process the waste, and potentially liberate green hydrogen at the same time. If you tried to do that, so let's say you went to Renos' lab at Birkbeck, or another lab that was working in that space, and design that bacterium, it might not work when you take it from the fume hood to a river full of dead fish. And so you might then be able to quickly move to another lab where you could design a polymer to encapsulate that synthetic biology. And that might overcome the constraints. And so there's this aspect of designing the research, actually getting all the different components in place quickly to create the technology. And then in the last year, the 3rd year of the PhD, you would have DSV support, as you would throughout, but particularly here, for bringing in co-founders and for approaching fundraising and private investment partners. We've got a lot of partners that we speak to, and you would leave with that skill set as well. So you'd have the technology, the team, the funds to get going. And then that's a really stable path if we're thinking about the life sciences ecosystem at large, and trying to get more people to use their PhD once they've graduated to maybe go a bit quicker than 7 years, as Renos is telling us, into the workforce. We need people that they're passionate about, but we also need that research to be aligned with really high level strategic goals, probably for the nation at that kind of scale, like green hydrogen would be. We need that kind of deep interdisciplinarity where you're approaching a question of green hydrogen, but you could bring in bacteria and synthetic biology. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to pull together, and we think that this runway is a compact way to do it, where now people are dedicated to the vision that they started pursuing during their PhD. They're funded to continue that vision. They probably helped to bring international investment into the UK as they're doing that, and they're creating high-value jobs. And so we see this tying into the narrative, which I'm sure Nick and others will pick up around our clusters and how important they are for developing the workforce in the UK.
And when you're working with universities, and maybe bring Renos back into this, I mean, is this something that will end up being a collaborative program, let's say with Birkbeck or with the Lido program or with one of the other DTPs? I mean, how do you actually interact with existing programs? I don't know if you've got a comment on that, Renos, and you're still on mute, by the way.
Well, Lido itself is, the program is set up ID interdisciplinary, right?
Yes, yeah.
So I like everything Thane's saying, and there's certainly plenty of space for dialogue there. I also like what Thane was saying about the diversity and inclusivity. But I think, what I was saying is, okay, so we produce the graduates, now what? They're supposed to get a job or something. Whereas I think what Thane's saying is these guys are going to
are we losing people away from that? I mean, are we getting people going into, I guess you could say the financial sector might be still part of ours, but are they mainly staying in the sector?
So if you look at the Lido website, which I happen to have conveniently in front of me, the first career destination of Lido alumni is 43% academia, 47% private sector. There's a couple of bar charts showing that the minor sectors are government and charity non-profits. And the kind of roles are primarily, 60% research engineering, less than 20% consultancy, management, finance.
Okay.
Then it's, science, writing, data analytics, policy, other. So, we've got this almost half and half split between academic and industry roles, primarily of a research nature, but some into the policy, strategy and finance.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we'll come back to you two guys because talent is obviously one of the key. It's a key block to innovation. I want to move on to the Catapult Network and speak to Nick on this. So Nick, the Catapult Network was established, I guess about 10, 11 years ago, stated aim of bridging the gap between research and industry. So do we believe they're playing a part in translating that early research into industrial programs, and are they correctly focused?
Right, thanks, Paul. Yeah, so how to answer that, and I guess, in the broader sense, is that a successful government initiative? So maybe just a couple more words about the Catapult, a couple of words on cell and gene therapies, and a bit of our history to try and answer those questions. So yeah, Catapults, what are we? We are, as you've said, brought into being by government about 10 years ago, but we're private not-for-profit organisations, and the general model of a Catapult is an intervention in a technology and market space that the government wishes to see growth in, and we're funded by Innovate UK. Initially, we'll be pretty much fully government funded, but the model is that we leverage that out into other grant funding or commercial funding, and we use that government funds to build capability that we can deploy into the sector, and we look for market barriers that we can address that the market can't or won't address, and by effective interventions of that nature we can help that market grow. So that's what a Catapult's all about, and obviously we're focused on cell and gene therapies. What are those? Really at the forefront of medical technologies where you can genetically modify cells to replace missing or defective genetic information. One of the key things about them is the potential to cure. That's what you've seen with the products that have been developed, that they don't just symptomatically treat diseases, and often they will treat diseases that have got no conventional cures or treatments, but they can cure diseases, cure cancers that other therapies simply can't. So if you go back 10 years, the view of cell and gene therapies, it was not at all clear whether there was going to be a cell and gene therapy industry. The products were so new. There were some reasonably advanced investigative products, but could they become sort of more mainstream wasn't understood. And I think a very timely intervention by the government to consider setting up a cell and gene therapy catapult, or cell therapy catapult as we were originally, because the scope of operations was not foreseen as to where the science would go. And that story continues about how we broaden out and adapt and change. So an intervention 10 years ago to help see whether there could or should be a cell and gene therapy industry in the UK, and to support that happening. And over that 10 years, it's an interesting evolution that we've had. So we started off with laboratories in London to look at the sort of more basic technologies and think about what might industry need to deploy these technologies. and also environment shaping. So what might the wider sort of regulatory or commercial environment require to get hold of and progress cell and gene therapies. But as we've moved forward as a Catapult, we've seen that market begin to form, and we've seen an evolution of the barriers. So we've done things like build a quite well-known manufacturing innovation centre in Stevenage that was originally commissioned in 2018. We then went on to double the size of it. It's got 12 clean rooms. And the purpose of that was a recognition that those emerging SMEs in the cell and gene therapy space didn't have the right infrastructure, access to the infrastructure in the UK to progress their products into the clinic and towards commercial manufacturing. So we used government intervention and government funding to build that facility, and we can then engage with collaborators in a unique Catapult model to help them drive their products through towards the clinic, critically to get those treatments to patients, but also lodging that in the UK so that we can make sure that those fantastic inventions moving through the innovation space and stay here and hopefully move on to manufacturing. We've got some evidence of that happening. And then beyond that, we've lots of talk about skills, a recognition that the lack of a flow of well-trained people in the advanced therapy space was going to impede the market. So we've had a number of interventions to build capabilities about skills and training to make sure that as a Catapult, we can help support that supply of labour, often very much picking up things from the places that have been described by the other speakers, to make sure that the industry is serviced with those people. Really critically, that's essential to maintain funding into the sector. People aren't going to fund a sector that they see a skills deficit. So what's the product of all of that 10 years on? The Catapult over that 10 years has received £128 million of government funding. We've directly leveraged that into £223 million worth of other grant funding and commercial income. And we can look at that advanced therapies, cell and gene therapy industry, and we can see it's raised something in the order of £5.5 billion over that 10 years. So that's a fantastic leverage in terms of money from a government perspective. And the reality of the cell and gene therapy industry is, we are, sort of the UK is preeminent in Europe. Globally, we've got almost 10% of the clinical trials ongoing in the UK. We've got around something like 45% of the therapy developers of advanced therapies in the UK relative to the rest of Europe. So it's a great sector. And we won't claim to have delivered all of those things, but I think we can be confident we can actually very well evidence that we played a critical role in helping that sector. So I think we think a good initiative on a government's behalf to stimulate the sector. But a couple of closing sort of comments or thoughts. Timeliness of the intervention, I think, was great when cell and gene therapy is done at exactly the right time. Focused, it was an intervention about cell and gene therapies, and I think it's really important because we know exactly what we're doing and we've driven that very hard. And I think you need to sustain it as well. So, we're just negotiating our third 5-year round of funding, and we know that the job isn't done yet with cell and gene therapies. It's still a relatively new industry. There's lots of countries get very focused on it. Lots of people want to lodge those development and manufacturing capabilities, and we need to refocus and as a Catapult, reinvent ourselves, look at those new challenges, but also as the UK, try really hard to make sure we maintain that lead that we've got. You're on mute, Paul.
Yeah, just on that comment, obviously 2011, as you said, the cell and gene therapy industry, we didn't know if it was going to happen or not. So, there was a specific focus then. 10 years on, it is an industry, and it's an industry that's working. So how do you make yourself, just very briefly, how do you make yourself as relevant today as you were 10 years ago?
Okay, well, so I guess it's a question, what's timely today? What do we need to be doing today? So yes, there's an industry. We've got something like 9 approved advanced therapies, approved and reimbursed therapies in the UK. But if you look at some of the statistics, the FDA has predicted that towards the end of the decade, they may be approving something like 20 to 30 advanced therapies a year. So this industry is just at its beginning. So what are the things that need to happen to support that in the UK, and what's actually required to make these technologies reach their full potential? It's going to be things like, the ways and means of making these things today isn't going to be like they're made 10 years from now. it will look antiquated, old, and inappropriate. But that's fine. It's where we are. But we know that's the case. So we're thinking about things like, you know, technological innovations in process automation, genetic engineering of organisms and cells, to how do you increase productivity, all those kind of things, manufacturing infrastructure, you know, the facilities that we might use are probably going to look very different. So what are those future challenges and gaps? And this is what we do, and we need to reinvent ourselves. So those are things we're thinking about. But also you can look at the regulatory environment is still not what's required. You know, the regulators are still learning, and even the economic models, because we have curative therapies. The way that organisations like NICE currently value these things is not really aligned to the potential value they deliver directly to healthcare systems, but also we increasingly think about the wider economic value. That if you cure somebody, you can reintroduce them, they can stay economically active. There's lots of nuances that we need to think about in terms of how you value these things. So there's some of the barriers that we continue to look at that we know need to be addressed for them to really reach their potential.
Okay, thanks for that. Good time to talk to Joe. Obviously, Joe, we've been hearing about talent, we've been hearing about the DTPs, we've been hearing about the Catapult Network. So from your perspective, should the government be trying to set the direction of travel, or should its role merely be to respond to the needs of the sector by setting up, you know, appropriate financial incentives?
Yes, so that's a great question, Paul, and maybe I just sort of start with a very concise potted history of some of the government initiatives. And as a business consultant with PwC, we really got involved in that immediately after the EU referendum vote. Mm-hmm. So June 2016, working with the industry, saying what they might want from a Brexit agreement. And of course, then that morphed into an industrial strategy, and all of that thinking about how to preserve and grow the life sciences industry in the UK. And, you know, it really continues to be a growth driver, both economically and innovatively for the UK. It employs 584,000 people in the UK. That includes direct labour as well as indirect and induced. Those jobs are growing about 4% per annum. And those jobs are economically very beneficial. GVA per head is around £96,000. We invest more in R&D in life sciences than any other sector. So we invest 3.9 billion in the UK in life sciences versus around 2 billion in IT and 2 billion in automotive, with a strong caveat that that is a tenth of what the US invests in R&D in life sciences. But nonetheless, you can see what a strong growth driver it is. And it was fascinating. I thought, you know, just looking in 2021, so we were just coming out of, well, the vaccines for COVID were in people's arms. We'd been a lot of work in drug repurposing. And in that period in 2021, we saw 3 government papers and a paper written by Sir John Bell as an advisor to government, really saying what you needed to develop and foster life sciences. So to your point, Paul, this was the government sort of setting the direction, suggesting the direction of travel. So March 21, we had Future of UK clinical research delivery, which was about embedding clinical research in the NHS, making it patient-centred, streamlined, efficient, and enabled by digital and data. May 21, we had the Task Force on Innovation, Growth and Regulatory, affectionately known as TIGR, which is kind of Brexit Britain. What's the new clinical trial landscape post-COVID and Brexit, and what can we do from a regulatory perspective there? Again, embedding clinical research in the NHS and really making the UK leading global centres for innovative research by cutting bureaucracy and making it financially attractive too, with missions and themes. So the group will be familiar with those, but they're, you know, dementia, immunotherapy and advanced diagnostics for cancer, novel vaccines, cardiovascular, respiratory, ageing and mental health. So since then, we've seen things like the dementia mission come to the fore. And then finally, in July 21, we had the UK Innovation Strategy, cross-sector, describing that increase to £22 billion investment in UK R&D, but with a heavy focus on life sciences. So if I put my candid hat on now, Paul, if I may, I mean, thankfully, all of these papers agreed with each other and were still supporting me. But I suppose a lot of the time, you know, we make these grand statements, in many ways, make things a little bit complicated. and then dilute the impact of those initiatives in the way in which we execute those initiatives, and also the way in which we fund those. And I was, very taken by Nick's comment about focus there, because these things were pretty broad reaching in terms of their approach. There was a heavy dose of politics around that as well. So things were claimed as victory, which were sort of not new money, but money shuffled around, or we've made the UK a great investment environment, and look, X, Y, and Z have invested in here, where in fact those investment decisions had already been made. So I think, to be honest with you, you get a lot of people feel quite jaundiced about some of those government-led initiatives. And I think the key thing around this is we shouldn't rest on our laurels. I do a lot of international work as well. And I've been involved with the French initiative around life sciences, which is President Macron committing 7.3 billion euros to make France a magnet for biotech research and development by 2030. I do some work in the Middle East, where again, the depth of sovereign wealth funds and the strength of ambition can lead to a lot of innovation. So, I'm kind of pleading with the same thing that Nick says, it's around focus and sustainability and being consistent. So I think some of the key things around this is great ideas at the government level, and it's doing that in consultation and listening to industry, listening to academics, listening to patients. And remember, voice of the patient is coming to the fore to present something in a combined way. And if I look at things like the Accelerated Access Collaborative, that was a good initiative by the way in which you put together those parties. And then I think one of the key things is consistency as well. We can't keep shifting strategy. The industry was a bit bemused in November last year. Was a footnote in Jeremy Hunt's budget was clamping down on R&D tax credits and reducing that, and so that was potentially leaving a gap of around 3 billion for the UK life sciences industry. Now it looks like that'll be reversed, but nonetheless, those sorts of initiatives are inconsistent with that overall government messaging. Oh, you're on mute, Paul.
Yeah, question I was going to ask you. When I got, a number of years ago, I was chairing the BIA's Manufacturing Advisory Committee, and we got involved with DTI. One thing I was always is that still an issue for us, or can we get around that?
I'd like to think it, yeah. I mean, some things retain, a lot of people still dust down the Lord Sainsbury report about bioclusters, which was looking at all the attributes around bioclusters. And gosh, I mean, how long has that been? It was published probably about 15, 16 years ago, I think, if you look in terms of time. So I think there are some things that last through that. But at the same time, again, me with my candid hat on, clearly you saw the UK on the front foot when it came to COVID, collaborations that we never thought would normally work, regulatory processes working at speed, engagement of patients. And yet we've seen that dismantling of parts of that system. We've seen the dismantling of VMIC, the Vaccines Manufacturing and Innovation Centre, which was a core part in terms of the technologies and the people and the skills behind the AstraZeneca vaccine. We've seen clinical trials becoming tougher for people to participate in. And, who'd have thought that people would be doing lateral flow tests at home and reporting results, and yet the British population don't have that capability to do it now. So I don't know, I'm skeptical, Paul, about this ability so these initiatives to be set up and run consistently.
Joe, thanks for that. What I'd like to do now is open this up to the floor, or the virtual floor. What's the best way of doing this, all? Are we going to ask people to put hands up or type something out on the message system?
Yeah, I think either. But if anyone's got a question, it might be good to ask the panel directly by raising your hand.
Do we have any questions on here? There's a hand there. I have to click on that. That looks like Alex.
Greetings all, thank you for the discussion. I've been out of the PhD game for a few years now, but even back when I was doing a PhD, I was paid bugger all massively less than working at my JP Morgan Chase analyst job, and it was kind of like a degree of persecution. And I've noticed that as the years have gone by, there's been increasingly restrictive IP clauses around PhDs. And a lot of people are now looking at degrees and thinking, is it worth it? Especially in software, a portfolio of projects is far better as a software engineer than a degree. And I feel that a lot of the PhDs, they teach you how to think, but you don't necessarily do a PhD to kind of acquire that skill. And is there a risk from just being like grossly underfunded and not particularly valuable, and the devaluation of the process as we go into the future? And how might we evolve propagating that problem?
Who'd like to pick that one up? Is that one for you, Renos? Yes, please.
All right. So I can only agree, Alex. The PhD students lobbied, certainly in Lido, for pay rise, and they got it. But what that meant was we had to cut the number of PhDs we offer because it comes out of the same pot of money. So you're right. At what point does it become not financially sensible to pursue a PhD? You said it yourself, a PhD builds other things. I would say resilience and the ability to think yourself out of corners is one of them. But I think, you know, a PhD is for what it's for. And as I said at the start, what do you do next? You get a job. And I think that's the point to hand over to Thane on the rest of the answer.
Sure. I think there are a lot of great points in that, Alex. And increasingly more and more PhDs are thinking about this transition. In the US even, there was a fear for a while that the bioscience, the life sciences industry would disappear because there's so much bad feedback coming from PhDs down and reducing people coming into the sector. But to your points, I think we do definitely need to pay PhDs more for their hard work. They're the kind of driving force of what the lab is achieving, and that research is valued at a higher rate outside of academia. Yeah, you raised several points. I think also on this idea of being relevant. So there's a question of what we're training people for and who we're recruiting. And so I think today we're recruiting by and large for the PhD people who have academic career ambitions and are high individualistic achievers. And what we're looking for in the venture science doctorate are people who have entrepreneurial career ambitions and are team-focused achievers, right? Collective achievers. And so we're thinking about how you design that process to train in skills that will last and outlast the skills that you need for the industry, like this understanding that we're talking about, like fundraising. These are actually important for being a professor as well later in your career to write grants, etc. So we do need to sort of change the incentive structures a little bit. And I guess, you know, other fields have already made this shift in sort of law and in engineering, in different disciplines. Universities are training people for the workforce. Whereas I think in the life sciences and in STEM a bit broadly, we're still sort of acting like we're training people for academia. And that's why we have some of these, I think, problems and pushbacks that you're raising. Well, you're on mute.
Yeah, I haven't got that. Thanks very much, Zaki. I think our next question, Stuart Rose.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I guess my question really is probably you, Joe. I want to sense your degree of optimism. So when the Chancellor stood up and delivered his autumn statement and said wants to turn the UK into the next Silicon Valley, everyone thought that's great. And innovation and life sciences were specifically cited. But then, of course, he did deliver the bit of a death knell blow in terms of the culling of the R&D tax credits. And I'm an optimist. I'd like to think that he approached that autumn statement at an intense pace, and the R&D tax credits was designed to stop the the takeaway restaurants who might be R&Ding a new menu rather than genuine knowledge-intensive capital industries like our own. So my question is, how optimistic are you that now the dust has settled and that the Chancellor and the PM are going to be a little bit more open-minded to something specific for the life sciences industry?
Yes, well, you know me, Stuart. I tend to see I'm a glass half full person, as you know.
Yeah.
I am optimistic around things, and I think it's interesting actually because I've also been talking to the Labour Party recently about their life sciences strategy as well, and I think so people on both sides of the House are beginning to think about what's required, and I suppose it's this ongoing recognition that the life science is such a key driver for the UK, both from an economics perspective, but also from a health impacts perspective as well. And what I would love to see, Stuart, is just us working more on translation, great upfront science, the ability to incubate companies and get maybe through seed and Series A, but as you know, it's Series B, C that's the gap. And actually having more sort of financial support and ability to do that. So, things like opening up to more institutional investments as well, and pension funds and those pieces, which again were part of that discussion there, I think are very positives as well. So I think what keeps me optimistic is the great science that we have and the people operating within that. And I suppose this resilience that we have as a sector to keep pushing.
Thank you.
Right, sorry, I just dropped off for a second. I think we're going to call Eddie Littlewers, I think, had a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I've got more of a comment, but people can feel free to correct me or whatever. But I had the privilege of working in Sweden for a biotech company for a number of years. And one of the things I discovered there, which I investigated a few weeks ago, and it's still the case, is that the intellectual property that an academic scientist discovers in the course of their research is retained by the academic scientist, not the institute in most cases that they work in. There are a few UK universities who do something similar. But again, I feel that, and I'll say something quite provocative, I feel that introducing a similar system in the UK, and in other words, taking out the tech transfer groups in universities from this loop, which I don't think helps, frankly. I think that could be something that could stimulate real entrepreneurship. And I saw that in Sweden many, many times. So Joe, I see you nodding. So I'm going to shut up now and ask for some comments.
Yes, and I know I fully agree with you, Eddie. And I think it's that's something that we've put in place with the UK Dementia Research Institute. So I'm on the board of that, and it covers 6 UK institutions. And with that, in terms of royalty and deals, half goes back to the institution to reinvest in dementia and half goes to the inventor. So not quite what you're saying there, but what's it's done in terms of opening up innovation and making things more, getting scientists more engaged, I think is one of the key things. One of the things, Eddie, I've looked at for a long time is the difference in terms of motivating scientists between the US and the UK.
Oh, yeah. Because
I guess those structures will work for scientists in the US who, seem to have a stronger focus on money versus some of the scientific community here. So I think, and I'm sure we've got, lots of scientists and academics on the panel who can support that. But I think those are some of the challenges about that system. But I think, in principle, Eddie, yes, I think it would be something that would be great to adopt here.
Can I just chime in as, oh, sorry, Renos.
So Renos didn't jump in.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself. I just want to briefly say that it also runs to how easy it is to do a collaboration with an industrial partner, run into the same IP roadblocks. And so I think that's a very valid point. We need to change this model to enable more effective, fluid entrepreneurial plays.
Thane.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Eddie, because I think actually this is one of the points Alex mentioned as well earlier, and this is critical. So at Deep Science Ventures, we're spinning out more spinouts per year than over 90% of UK universities. And a part of the reason we're incredibly productive in the system that we've built up. But we also have to factor into that the fact that less than 0.5% of UK PhDs are spinning out. And I think we need to think about whether if we're trying to drive for commercial impact and to have more innovation and more justification for the funding that's going in, great that we're doing great, but that's a tiny figure, and a huge part of that is who's owning the IP. And this is something I saw during my own doctoral training and with people in my cohort. If you're not letting people own their idea, why would they invent it? You know, why would they invent it for you to take it and do something else with it? And so it's a question of, we're certainly allowing people to do that within Deep Science Ventures, the founders own the IP. We're certainly allowing people to do that in the Venture Science Doctorate. And I think where you have little initiatives in the UK where people are owning more IP, you are seeing more of a drive towards entrepreneurship, because now there's that long-term incentive that you're actually creating maybe your career and something that you can be proud of. So this is just something we have to hit square on the head, or at least trial in a few programs and see whether or not we can inspire more entrepreneurs through the system. Particularly with the Venture Science Doctorate, we want to scale training to 1,000 PhDs a year. And so we really want people to go in, create something that's really going to shift our oncology sort of mortality rates, our other huge themes, but something that they can stay with, that they can be very proud of across their career. So great provocation, Eddie.
Thanks very much. Catherine, you got your hand up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually at Birkbeck, and I have previously worked not in biosciences, but in technology at Imperial and at UCL, and have been part of developing 2 startups and spin-outs with technology. But actually, in the main, the universities do recognise the student and PhD students' IPR rights. And what happens within the university is quite often there is an assignment of the rights to the university to act on behalf of the team. So, and if there is some money that comes through ultimately from a spin-out that's successful, the students have a stake in the company from the start. Also, I'd just like to say, of course, it can always get better, but I think that is absolutely clear in most universities. They want the students to be helped and to be part of the ongoing development of something. Of course, with a PhD, it's always about the contribution to the body of knowledge. And I'd say again that with some exceptions where it's very, very theoretical, most PhD students actually want to do something active that will push the boundary and then to ride with it. I think the problem has been, if I may say, that companies quite often do not understand the difference between research as opposed to application of ideas. And that's one of the ongoing sort of constant discussions that one has both with spin-outs and with PhD research of what constitutes a clear PhD subject that is worthy of getting that award at the end of it. And finally, if I may just say that most PhD students, if you look at their student debt, I mean, they do definitely need financial help, and we've got very few sources of getting that funding. But if they've had to get, particularly in biosciences, a BSc, an MSc, and then a PhD and live, they can quite often be touching on £100,000 of debt. So one has to recognise the huge costs in research.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Catherine. Appreciate that. I just want to make sure we keep going. We've got Francis. You also have your hand up.
Yeah, it was more of like a clap at the start, really, for Eddie's. Thanks for all the speakers. It's great to. Thanks for convening it. It's an interesting set of conversations. I think I agree with all of that. I think I've worked now. I've done a PhD, then I worked in like Cancer Research UK, so like medical funding for PhDs, and then back into kind of, I guess, VC type of space. And it's quite galling when you see the amount of effort the academic has to put in to get the funding to cover their own costs, their building costs. When you look at grant applications and you have to add like FEC onto it or whatever it's called, just, you know, imagine being a business and applying for that and saying, hi, we run a wildly inefficient ship and we'd like you to pay for that. So there's that side of things. And the academic has written that, they've come up with that themselves. And they happen to be housed in a university. And I would agree with Thane's points there that, I mean, you know, there's certainly things in my head that I would like to have turned into technologies, and I have deliberately not done that yet because I haven't found a space that isn't a university that like I can do that in. I think the other part to this as well, there's a book by, is it Maricato or something like that, called The Entrepreneurial State. So I do think, you know, we put a lot of public money into research and the public should get something back from that. And I can see that universities were that original model in terms of, well, there's public money going in, and so that goes back to universities. But universities aren't the state. They have huge amounts of money held back, usually from charging students lots for rent and all sorts of things. And if in fact all companies that got, you know, I think that's something we should think about, is A, removing the ownership rights from people that haven't invented the technology, but B, if public money has gone into funding that technology, a minimal non-controlling share, so that when these companies exit to places like America, we still see some of the upside. Because I think the argument that you make all that money back in tax on employees and stuff, actually, if it's like a digital unicorn or something like that, doesn't have any employees, or worse, strips out an existing, you know, entire economy and replaces it with an app, how does that financing get back to the society that paid for it? And I think I had a series of random things to throw into the conversation, so I'll leave it there. But thanks, great so far, interesting chat from everyone.
Thanks very much, Francis. I'm just aware of the time on this. Just wanted, yeah. So summarising what we're hearing, and kind of a couple of strong messages coming through here is what we're I think all recognising is the cost to the PhD student is huge. They're not well to say, and they're not getting the sufficient future rewards or the incentives to actually create novel inventions and get the reward back from that. So that's quite an interesting take-home message. Just to if there was one wish you could have granted for improving competitiveness in the life sciences sector in the UK, what would it be?
I'll come back to the point I made earlier and the one that Joe made. It's about commitment, long-term commitment. I think, you know, we're in a deep tech industry. Things don't happen on a short time frame. It's extremely difficult. You know, Catapults, we've been assessed, and the government, you know, up until recently couldn't decide whether it still wanted a Catapult Network or whether it was any good. Very, very hard to drive innovation when you're not sure if you're going to be around and supported in long term. So that would be, if I can wave my magic wand, it would be a recognition that we need to support this thing for 20, 30 years to make a difference to it. And it will make a phenomenal difference if that happens.
That's great. Thank you very much. Renos.
I would echo almost the same as Nick there. I would say what we need to do is to realise that every report we produce on life sciences says it's the future of UK economy. So let's back that up with some real money, some real incentives, both on the IP side and on the tax and revenue side.
Thanks very much. Thane, what's on your wish list?
Yeah, I would say let's tackle that 0.5%. Let's be more ambitious about PhDs and their ability to spin out. And I think that's a point that speaks to the development of the clusters. So talent going in and having those sort of clear paths, and then knowing exactly what you're doing. That's an ecosystem design piece. So I'm really excited with our response off the back of things like COVID, where obviously in the US, They had agencies like DARPA and people like Dan Wattendorf predicting well in advance and setting up mRNA technology and actually funding Moderna $25 million years and years in advance of this. We have the Pirbright Institute, we have innovation knowledge centers, we have the same capacity, and we showed that we could also deliver those projects with things like Dame Sarah at Oxford developing the AstraZeneca vaccine. So I think it's just a question of being ambitious across the whole ecosystem. We have the same capacities as the US if we would allow entrepreneurs to come in and use them and drive them.
Thank you very much. And Joe, we'll leave the last word to you on this.
Thanks, Paul. My plea would be a more finessed view around levelling up. I chair a biocluster in London. I chair an accelerator in Birmingham. I suppose I see it easier for us to get government money for the accelerator in Birmingham because it's not London and the Southeast. It's easier for me to get ministers to visit Birmingham. Gosh, we even had Liz Truss during that 44-day period come and visit our I would ask for.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. We're just about out of time. It just remains for me to say a huge thank you to Renos Savva, to Thane Campbell, to Nick Johnson, to Joe Pisani for giving their time to go through this. I thought it was a really interesting discussion, and thanks to everyone who took the time out to come and listen and participate in what's been said today. I think there's some interesting take-home messages. I think one of them is there is a degree of optimism here that, you know, we as a country we've done well, and I think at the point Joe made, you know, over COVID we were able to put things together that probably none of us would imagine could have happened just, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. It is a shame that we're not continuing those, but maybe we can remind people of how successful a lot of those initiatives were, and that's what we need going forward. I think the other message also very much is we need to value our PhD students, not only in what we pay them, in the opportunities we give to them, because that truly is the way forward. And with that, I'd just like to thank again everyone, and hopefully it was been a worthwhile session, and thanks to Ola and thanks to Helen for organising all of this, and goodbye everyone.
Thank you, and thank you, Paul. Thank you.